Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, I want to talk about the most terrifying moment of my life, which happened at a point when, by all outside measures, I was winning. Picture me at 25 years old. I was living in a beautiful apartment in the Seaport district of Boston, all glass, high ceilings, stunning views. I was making well over six figures at a job I was supposed to love. I had achieved the exact dream that my family, my peers, and the community I grew up in had defined as success. But one afternoon, sitting alone on my couch, I was overcome by an absolute physical terror. It wasn't a fear of financial ruin. It was the chilling, bone-deep realization that I had no idea who I was. Every decision, every degree, every job title was a step taken not out of genuine desire, but out of a desperate, consuming need to earn approval. I was living a life that was solely in service to the perceived expectations of others. I'd become so concerned with getting people to like me that I had constructed an entire persona, a high-achieving, perfectly agreeable, glittering suit of armor, and the actual me inside was suffering. My self-esteem was not a foundation. It was a hot air balloon, tethered to the daily, hourly temperature of other people's opinions. If they smiled, I soared. If they frowned, I crashed. And in that quiet, empty room, with no audience to perform for, the tether snapped and the balloon deflated completely. That glittering success felt like the greatest betrayal of self imaginable. That experience led me to three major truths we're going to discuss today, which will form the structure of this episode. First, we need to clearly define the problem, the perils of chasing universal likability. It's an unwinnable, exhausting game that requires you to constantly shrink and betray your authentic self. Second, we'll dive into the principle, the absolute, non-negotiable truth that you only get one chance to be you. To spend that time impersonating someone else's definition of happiness is the ultimate disservice. We will talk about cultivating radical self-loyalty, because the only person who is unconditionally loyal to you is you. And finally, we'll explore the practice. How do we stop performing and start living? This is about building that internal compass, setting boundaries, and embracing sincerity so that your self-worth is rooted deeply inside you, not attached to the external world. The journey from seeking approval to seeking authenticity is the hardest but most rewarding one you'll ever take. Let's dive in. Now, before we do, and before we get into this episode, which I'm really excited for, and I know this isn't the manifestation episode we talked about, but some things happened this week that really compelled me to speak about this. And by things happening this week, it just meant discussing this very topic with other people. So before we dive in to the problem, the principle, and the practice, I want to share a poem with you guys. And this poem you may know. It is The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Let me just give a little intro here. So when we talk about choosing our own path, I always think about Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken. It is the ultimate expression of charting your own course, even when it feels scary. Here's the poem in its entirety. I want you guys to listen to how Frost captures the moment of decision. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that the passing there, had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Wow. It's like this song from Mama Cass, Make Your Own Kind of Music. We're going to get into this more, but I really just to take a moment to reflect on that. I want to read that again. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. I will tell this tale down the line. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. That is the essence of radical self-loyalty, choosing the road that is yours, even when the popular one looks easier and safer, or because you know the easier path would lead you right back to an empty apartment in the seaport, wondering who you are. So let's dive in. I know at the beginning of the episode, I shared a little bit about my existential moment, and I want to expand on that. So I don't think this struggle was unique to me, but growing up, and a lot of this was my perceived perception of how things were. I felt that I had to achieve, and I felt that I had to achieve to receive love from my parents, and I had to achieve in order to give permission for me to feel love for myself. And what that cultivated in me was a desire to focus on the external achievements, which sit outside me. Later in life, when I journaled about this, I called this the resume complex. This idea of building up an identity of fancy firms that you've worked for, or degrees you have, or GPAs, or test scores. But none of that tells a story about the person you are. And it's funny, in our society, we become infatuated with the guys with 5 Super Bowl rings, or the hot wife, or the sports car, or the big job title, or the great vacation home. And that stuff is all well and good. But what does that tell us about the person who has those things? The relationships they keep with others, their spiritual fitness, whether or not they're content. Not very much at all. And so I think what this gets into, this idea of what Carl Jung calls the masks, these masks we build, these personas or veneers we build up and display and show to the world, are somewhat related to people pleasing. And it's this idea that for me, I can only speak for me, the way I was living my life in my early 20s was as follows. I walk into a room or environment, I have to get everyone to like me. It's like a politician shaking hands and kissing babies. And my self-esteem and self-worth was literally tied to how people thought about me. And that's very unhealthy because it's all well and good, as I talked about in the monologue, when people were liking me, but when they turned on me, that crushed my self-worth because I didn't have a sense of self-worth cultivated independently of the external. I couldn't be a ship that could weather any storm because my self-worth and my stability was actually directly tethered to the height of the waves and ferocity of the ocean. And in college, I made a mistake. I mean, I was addicted to Xanax, and I one night took a lot of Xanax. I'm not making an excuse for this, but basically, I ended up hooking up with a girl who I shouldn't have, and I ended up stealing her jacket. And I got caught for stealing her jacket. And it was like all this talk around the school. And I think what happened in hindsight, because this plagued me for many years, is that And I've since come to accept it and healed from it. But I obviously did a bad thing there. Uh, I think because, though, I had worked so hard to cultivate this mask of this guy who was like popular and could get along with everyone. And I just projected this persona that when I made a mistake that was fundamentally at odds with that persona, the mask sort of shattered. And that left people really disappointed. And it left me in a very vulnerable place where it was as if my very existence, the person I knew, the foundations of that had been challenged and it crumbled. And that was my shell, and I only identified with the shell of me. And so when that crumbled, I didn't know who I was left with. And for many years, I used drugs to cope with that, existential crisis. And in my monologue, I actually talked about when I was 26, having been a high functioning, user of substance to cope with these feelings of deep existential discontent. I had a realization, finally, all this shit caught up to me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have no idea who I am. I have no idea who I am. Has everything I've been led to believe that's going to make me happy not true? I have all these relationships with these people, but are they built on this superficial foundation of connection with not the real me, but the mask I wear for the world? There's also the aspect of the emotional labor that goes into upholding one of these masks and cultivating one. Because when you're not living as your true authentic self, it requires a multiple more of energy to just upkeep that persona that people have come to know and expect. And that wasn't the real me. It's not like I'm a completely different person. But as I've gotten in touch with myself, I certainly realize I'm not the guy with infinite social battery and who can be friends with everyone. Because when you're friends with everyone, you're best friends with no one because you're not being your authentic self. So I want to get here into the problem, okay? And the problem is because let's be real, wearing a mask or living in service to expectations of society, of your peers, of your parents, whatever it may be, is people pleasing. It and that doesn't mean that you can't set boundaries in your personal life, this, that, and the other, but it means that you are choosing to compromise living as your authentic self for the sake of projecting a persona that holds that is not in true alignment with the person you are. So I want to talk about the temperature gauge or gauge analogy. And I really want to drive home this point of when you live for other people and you have a mask that people in your community, in your life, in your network have come to expect that shows up, your sense of self-worth it actually lives outside of you in the condition of that mask you've constructed. That is what represents the you. It doesn't live inside you. It's not a one-to-one fit over your soul and your essence, but rather it's this construct that lives outside of you. And so because of that, it would be like taking care of almost a pet. And if anything bad happens to the pet, that's a reflection of you. But you can't always control what that pet does or what that mask does because it's not the true you. It's more like tending to a garden. It's not truly in your self control because it's not as natural and thoughtless as living authentically. It has to be more calculated. And when it's more calculated, you can sometimes miscalculate. And because people have come to expect that mask that you project to the world, when there's a fracture or a split in that, it's a direct indictment on you as a person and your self esteem. Because your sense of self esteem and self worth is tethered to the guy you project on LinkedIn or the job you have. If that's your persona, what happens when you lose that job? mean, this happens I've seen this in recovery where I meet folks, wonderful people. They've gone 65 years without having a problem of any kind that calls for recovery. It can sometimes be a spiritual crisis, mental health crisis, existential crisis. It's not always substance. They retire, and all of a sudden, they're not working at that job anymore, which was their whole persona and whole life. And they're like, who the heck am I? I don't know this guy. I don't know how to be this guy outside of work because that was my life. That was me, Bill. I was the guy who was the CEO of the Fortune 100 company. I've stepped down. Gosh, you saw this with, and his name is escaping me, uh, Howard, something Howard, who's the CEO of Starbucks, the guy who founded Starbucks. And he like built Starbucks from nothing, came up in social, the projects, assisted housing. And he stepped away from Starbucks, and you can see that he was having this existential meltdown by nitpicking and micromanaging the new CEO who came in. Gosh, it's going to kill me. I'll look this up while I talk. But the new CEO came in, and he was micromanaging the guy and criticizing him publicly because his self-worth was tied to the health of Starbucks. Pretty interesting. CEO of Starbucks. Howard Schultz. Howard Schultz. And he had a meltdown when this new guy came in. And listen, it's not unique to Howard Schultz. This is a problem I think we all need to be thinking about. Is like, who are we? Independent of job title. Independent of what other people think about. If the whole world were to turn against you tomorrow, would you have the authenticity and sincerity of self to be able to stand firm in who you are? If the world came crashing down against you. I've said this today. Have you cultivated the authenticity and sincerity of self such that if you were met with an existential threat where it was suggested you had to get rid of a part of who you truly are, would you be willing to die for that? That is the question. We're back. Sorry for that little commercial break. I do live with some other people, so there was some commotion. As I was saying, this idea of cultivating the sincerity and authenticity of self such that if you if you were confronted with an existential demand that asked of you to abandon a part of your authentic self that wasn't hurting anyone, I think that's important, as long as you're not hurting anyone, is that something you'd be willing to die for? Because what is the point of life if you can't be your authentic self? Why are we here? What are we doing here? If you're not going to live in service to yourself, what are you doing on earth? What is this whole exercise? It is not to live in service to the expectations of mom or dad, or what your friends expect, or what society expects of you. You need to live for you. Granted, it's taken me nearly 29 years to realize this. And here I am talking to a mic and my iPhone camera. But I'm doing it because I want to, and it feels good, and this feels like me. All right, so sue me. Anyways, talked about tethering yourself to the opinion of others and how that's detrimental, because when a storm hits, you can't be stable in the face of that storm. The world is going to get stormy. Opinions are going to shift. And if you have your self-worth and self-esteem tethered to something outside of you, to something outside of the values and the person who you are going to get burnt. You're going to get shattered. Take it from someone who did. Shattered. We spoke about this a little bit, but I want to talk about the exhaustion of the mask. It is unsustainable to keep up a perception that isn't authentically you, a persona. It just is. You might see someone who looks like they have it all together, and maybe there are people like that. I tend actually not to believe that's a real thing, because life is about prioritization. You cannot have everything together. sacrifice is an innate part of life. But there is a price to pay for that. I mean, in some way, you have to pay that debit eventually of that emotional exhaustion of pretending to be someone you're not, or at least buffing up parts of yourself that are not authentically you. Now, I'm not saying you've got to go into the workplace and tell your boss off because that's how you're feeling. Life is a game. Alan Watts talks about this. Alan Watts is great, by the way. Look into him. But he talks about how life is a game. The world is Maya, the great illusion. It's the great drama. And we all play a game to a certain extent. Now, society calls the people who recognize it as a game the ones who are far out. Right? The ones who recognize it's a game and are willing to play the game, but at the end of the day, don't take it too seriously because it's just a game. And life is not that serious, people. The real far out ones are the people playing the game who actually take the role so seriously. You know these people. The guy in his corporate job who takes it so seriously. I use guy, it could be girl, anyone. The people who take the game so seriously that they can't take a step back and recognize the absurdity of it all. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means the life is absurd. And there's some comfort to be taken in that. Actually, it's not so serious. The important stuff is getting in touch with who you are. For me, knowing who Taylor is. Because I am my only ride or die. You have all these relationships in life, but they are all at some point conditional. The only person who's with you from birth until death is you, baby. So you better allow that you to come out and play and get to know that you. We'll talk about how you can do that. But that's really the point of this year. So we talked about the mental and emotional fatigue. It is a full-time unpaid job that slowly drains the joy and spontaneity out of life. You got to take the mask off sometimes. Sure, play it in the office. If you're a celebrity lawyer, play it on TV and whip up some frenzy about that case you're trying. I get it. It's what brings texture to life. It's kind of fun, actually. But know when to take that mask off. Let people in. Let people in to connect with that real you. And I'll tell you, the problem with keeping the mask on all the time and having to be the person who walks into the room and needs everyone to like them is, and I mentioned this, you're friends with everyone, best friends with no one. The problem is those relationships are not formed on the basis of your authenticity. And as a result, those relationships are not durable. Even more so, and here's what you discover when you renounce this idea that you have to get everyone to like you, is it's uncomfortable at first. Not everyone is going to like the fact that I'm putting out a podcast. I'm sure I have family members that are rolling their eyes. That's okay. That's fine. I'm newsflash, I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing this for me. And and this isn't just about family members, and I'm not saying this is actually happening, but for anyone, and I'll use the podcast as an example. If I have friends who think I'm crazy for doing this, good for them. I'm actually not doing this for them. I'm doing this for me. That's why I'm here on earth, baby, is to live for me. And I'm just going to see what happens. I'm going to trust in God and the universe and hope that God is there to catch me when I take this leap and publish this stuff online. I have no idea what's going to happen. I'm doing this with no expectation of outcome because it's like a God trust fall. That's what it is. And as I was saying, when you decide to not care what people think, because their reactions are not your responsibility. That is the foundation of people pleasing. You feel responsible for other people's feelings. So long as you're not hurting anyone else, it is not your problem. And when you don't care if everyone likes you and you act as your authentic self, the people who gravitate towards you are the OGs. Those are the real ones. Those are real relationships there. Those are the relationships you should be forming because those are people who like you on the basis of you and who you are. And that is a magical, wonderful thing. Magical, wonderful thing. We're still in the problem. I promise we're going to get to the principle and then finish up with the practice. But the other parts of the problem are that the quest for universal approval is a fundamentally unachievable thing. It's an unwinnable game. As soon as you change for one person, you become wrong to another, creating an endless, frustrating cycle. The only way to win is to stop playing. Think about that. Let me read that again. The quest for universal approval is fundamentally unachievable. It's an unwinnable game. As soon as you change for one person, you become wrong to another, creating an endless, frustrating cycle. The only way to win is to stop playing. And stop playing so seriously. Again, like stop investing your worth into the game. Play the game, but you can do it in a detached way. But when it comes to like forming relationships with people, I'm not talking about being in a courtroom or being on TV, or although I think even in those places I would preach authenticity, because I think people can sense that when someone's sincere and authentic, and there's a gravitational pull to that, no matter what your opinions are. Again, because it's the authentic and sincere people that don't compromise on what they advocate for in the face of challenge, because it's actually them. And it is a life or death thing when you're exhibiting your authentic self. You're asking me to compromise on who I am. If you're asking me to compromise on the mask, sure, that stuff will crumble like that because there's no foundation there. It's the people who have the composition of self, the sincere attunement to self and that authentic expression who are the most dangerous, because there's nothing for them to compromise on if they're leading with that. So the other thing, it's an unwinnable game. I think that's a great point. The other thing is there's a cost to smallness. When you try to be liked, you often have to shrink your true opinions, passions, and personality. People pleasing prevents you from stepping into your full potential or making the bold choices necessary for a meaningful life. This podcast, as an example, I used to care so much what people thought that I would be embarrassed to do this podcast and put this stuff out, because inevitably, when you act as your true self, you inevitably are going to alienate some people who just don't vibe with it. And that means you're doing something right. If you are just concerned with how people are going to respond, you will be immobilized. You will be stuck in that fear. And I heard a great quote. The price of momentary embarrassment, me putting out this podcast, is a lot better of a price to pay than the price of regret. I've heard the price of discipline is better than the price of regret. I don't want to be that guy on his deathbed who's like, damn, I didn't have the courage to act on my true self, to display my true self to the world, and be unapologetic about it. Seriously. And it feels good, man. This feels great talking to you guys about all this. Now I want to transition. We talked about the problem. I want to talk about the principle and the power of radical self-loyalty. You've heard this phrase, you only live once, YOLO. But I don't just want to mention YOLO. I want to use it to pose a direct challenge to my audience. And I'm going to ask you, if this is the only time you get to be you, why are you spending it on trying to be a bad imitation of what you think others want? Spiritually speaking, we have this gift, this opportunity of incarnating in this weird experience we call life. No one really knows what it is, but it's here and we have the opportunity for it. Fact, you are going to die. Fact, this life is finite. How are you going to live it? Seriously, how are you going to live this life? What do you have to be afraid of? We're all going to die. Now, I have the benefit of having actually died during my near-death experience. And it showed me that mean, in my opinion, it's just a transition to another phase. It's not something to be afraid of. The experience, on balance, was actually pretty comforting. But how are you going to live? How are you going to measure the success of your life? Really, I mean, indulge in that exercise of putting yourself on your deathbed and looking back and asking yourself, was I brave enough? Was I courageous enough to do the thing I wanted to do, but stopped just short of doing it because I was worried I would be judged or people would look at me funny? This goes for anything: your sexuality, the types of people you like, the types of bodies you like, the hobbies you want to engage in, the job you want to work, the opinions you want to share. There's a time and place, and there's decorum for opinions, of course. But if you're drawn to do something and you are stopping short or censoring yourself or not acting on that highest passion because you're afraid of what other people will think, baby, you're doing life wrong. You're doing life wrong. I don't know how many shots we get at this thing called life. For now, I'm operating under the assumption that it's just one because I don't remember the others. And I haven't been told that there's going to be more. I have my suspicions that there will be, and that we've done this infinite times before, and we will do it again. But this is what an opportunity, what a gift. You are here on earth to live lessons, to learn lessons, to grow, to evolve your consciousness, to evolve spiritually, emotionally, to get in physical fitness, and to live your true self. We all have that true self in there. I'm going to talk later about how we discover that. There's also the unconditional nature of self. There's a core truth I want to emphasize. Those people you're trying to impress aren't unconditionally loyal to you. Only you are. Think about that. Yes, you have a spouse maybe, or kids, or family who are very close. Yes, and pretty close to being ride or dies, I'd say. But the only actual verifiable ride or die you have is you. So you better get to know you, and you better love you, and you better allow you to express his or herself, and allow you to live to use full potential, and protect you, and cultivate the real you, and allow that you to come out, because it was you from the beginning, it's going to be you on the ride, and it's going to be you at the end. And you better like the you that you're with, or better help that you come out and express itself. Cultivating an unconditional loyalty to your own well-being and truth is the ultimate form of self-respect. We all know this on some level. You see someone you disagree with maybe, but if they are acting on their highest passion and being sincere and authentic, there is an undeniable recognition of that and a respect of that. Take politics. I mean, I'm not very political anymore. I think all birds of the same feather, and I think it's all corrupted, truly. An episode for another time, and I'm not going to get political here, but I don't think we have a republic. I think we lost control after JFK got assassinated. But you see someone from the other side of a political topic. Anna Kasparian is someone who I've disagreed with at times. She's one of the Young Turks. She is so sincere in her views. It's not hackery that I have to respect it. I actually love it. That's what we should all be doing. Acting on our authentic, sincere selves. There's something beautiful about that. And it's a beauty that resonates with all of us. And it resonates because there's an inherent respect for that, because we see someone acting sincerely and with utmost authenticity, and we think, wow, it almost holds up a mirror to us. Wow, that's something I on my deepest core level, aspire to be, because that's what life's about. It's about letting that authentic self rip. There's a difference between politeness and inauthenticity. So I want to clarify, this is another point, that being genuine doesn't mean being rude or inconsiderate. It means your actions stem from your core values rather from a fear of disapproval. We're going to talk about constructing a compass of values. And when you construct a compass of values, think about what your values are. This is a great exercise for anyone to do. Allow those values to govern each next step you take on this path of life. And so long as you are following the direction of that compass and where your true values are pointing you to go or how to act, you won't feel guilt or remorse. I believe the amount of guilt or remorse we feel in this life is directly proportional to that differential between where our values compass points and where we take that step. If it's really far out of bounds, we're going to feel really guilty because it's out of line and disharmonious with our true self. Let's talk about attracting your tribe. Paradoxically, and I talked about this, when you stop trying to please everyone, you repel the wrong people and create space to attract the people who truly love and appreciate your authentic self. These connections are deeper, more supportive, and truly reciprocal. Enough said. That's the key right there. These are wisdom bombs. Thank you for coming along for the ride, too. If you're enjoying this episode, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe and leave a comment. Thank you. Practical shifts for sincere living. This is the final act of this podcast. I want to talk about the practice. So, the first practice, how to find your authentic self. I talked about the values exercise. You can find these online. I'll put one in the description. You print out a list of, there's like 50 values you can do: family, curiosity, adventure, humor, love, loyalty, honesty, justice, truth, humor. Identify your top 5 to 10. Really think about it. Like, take some time to identify these. That is your core self. Then from there, your job is to orient your actions and the steps you take in life to best align and be congruent with those values. That is what will nourish your soul and bring you fulfillment if you're acting in line with those values. It seems like an elementary exercise, but I'm telling you, it seems elementary because this stuff is elementary. It's specifically not rocket science. It's just hard to do because it takes bravery and courage. But it's not rocket science. It's accessible to anyone because we're all put on earth to do this, regardless of race, creed, intelligence, financial status, background, pedigree. We all have this duty to ourselves to self-actualize and become our true selves. Let's talk about the practice of, the other thing I wanted to talk about is one way to figure out who your true authentic self is, in addition to the values practice, is think about the stuff you were interested in childhood. For me, it was humor. It was showmanship. It was gabbing, talking. It was captivating people with my words. And I don't think this is not supposed to be self-flattery. This is my unapologetic statement of the things that bring me joy. And I'm not going to apologize for that. And though that is how I found out, and this is still a work in progress. I've by no means conquered this, but how I've decided to reorient and restructure my life to be more in line with the things I care about. It's not material things or a six-figure job or degrees or the pedigree of the employer on my LinkedIn. And I had all that. It's about nourishing my soul. I still have some responsibility. This is not preaching hedonism, but it's how to orient your life in a way that'll bring you fulfillment. Because at the end of the day, I mean, sure, I didn't have billions of dollars, but I had more than enough to take care of my needs and could spend on anything I wanted. And I found that to be a deeply hollow and depraved existence for me. But you look at people who have made it, quote unquote, and they sing a similar tune. So I don't think I'm pulling this out of a hat. But think about the things in your childhood that you were drawn to or that got you excited. Because when we were children, we didn't care about what other people thought. We acted on our highest order of desire and passion in the moment. And that's a beautiful thing. Then your responsibility. One of these things was improv club. I loved improv comedy. So I joined an improv club. Find the things you cared about in childhood and try to indulge in those hobbies. And here's the thing, without expectation of outcome. Do these things not to please or impress or judge yourself or rate yourself. Do it simply because you enjoy it. That is how you cultivate a an indemnable, a rigorous, a bulletproof self-esteem. How you feel good about yourself and come to love yourself and be your own best friend. There's also the practice of saying no as an act of self-preservation and boundary setting, not rejection. Because a lot of wearing that mask is about living in service to others. You have to assert yourself and not feel responsible for other people's feelings, so long as you're not hurting anyone. If someone asks you a favor and you can't do it, say no. That's okay. So recall when someone said no to you when you've asked them to do something. It's actually not the end of the world. I've experienced that, and I was thinking about this because I always have guilt when I tell someone no. But I've been on the other end of that, and it's like really not a big deal. Like when someone says no, and if they are someone who has a good composition of self, and they like, I probably wouldn't be asking them to for a favor in the first place if that wasn't the case. It doesn't. It doesn't chronically plague me that they've said no. It's okay. I actually sort of envy it sometimes. Like there was this guy when I worked in consulting. We were on a project. We were traveling to a city, and the hours in consulting are long. It's like travel Monday through Thursday, working from 8 a.m. to sometimes 10 or 11 p.m. with maybe an hour break for dinner, ordering lunch to the client. And it was like 6 p.m. and he got up and told the manager that he was going home. And the manager was like baffled because no one ever did this. And he's like, "Work is not my life." And he had this not cavalier and like defiant, but this sureness of self where he knew he wasn't trying to be a douche. He wasn't trying to ruin everyone's work product, but he was like, "Work is not my life. Take it or leave it. I'm going home." And I was just watching him envious. I was like, at the time, I did not have the courage to do something like that. And I saw that. And in the same way I talked about how we see someone as being sincere or authentic, you can't help but respect it. That was the case with this guy. If he's out there or if he's listening, thank you for that. And I hope you're doing well. Every no, so just to finish that thought, every no to something you don't want to do is a yes to something you truly value. It frees you up. As you get older, in your late 20s or early 30s, you realize because you meet more and more people, you don't have time for everyone. You have to be selective. And every no you say to one party or activity means a yes, or it frees up the availability for something that you can do with other people. My therapist made this point. He said, you meet all these people as you get older, but the amount of time you have in a day doesn't grow alongside that. You still have the same amount of time in a day. So you have to be picky. Identifying the why. So I want to encourage a moment of introspection. Ask yourself, why do I need this person's approval? Is it an old childhood wound? A cultural expectation? Shining light on the source of the need can diminish its power. Jung said something to the effect of, that which we fail to bring a name to remains invisible, controls our life, and we call it fate. That which we fail to bring a name to remains invisible, controls our life, and we call it fate. It's hard and it's scary to examine why we have certain behaviors, where that stems from. A lot of it is childhood stuff, and that doesn't mean you have to get all mushy and throw a self-pity party. But to know oneself is the greatest power. Know thyself. You have, that is, I think one of the most courageous things one can do, at least for me, it was the scariest thing, is to go inward and integrate your shadow. Explore the parts of yourself that you shy away from and you don't want to stare in the eyes or stare in the face of. Because it brings stuff up. It brings up old wounds. But as the poet Rumi said, the wounds are where the light enters. So you got to investigate those wounds. Lastly, start small. Not lastly, maybe. Let's see. Yeah, lastly, start small. Becoming who you are doesn't happen overnight. So, what I'm going to suggest are small, courageous acts of authenticity. State a genuine opinion in a low stakes conversation. Wear an outfit you love instead of a safe one. Or how about don't smile when you don't feel like it? When you're really exhausted after work, tell someone, hey, this conversation's great. I don't have the energy to have it right now. Don't compromise on yourself to go along with that conversation if you're too exhausted. Take those small steps. And what will happen, I promise you, is you will chip away at that core belief that governs your life that says, I need to be fearful of what other people think of me and stepping out of bounds of what they expect of me, because that's dangerous, or it's a cause to be fearful. Do that with little, small, courageous acts, and you will chip away at that core belief and say, hey, that actually wasn't so scary after all. You'll pull the curtain back and see the Wizard of Oz for who he is. The Emperor will begin to have no clothes. So we talked about the problem, the principle, and the practice. And really, I hope that in this episode, you guys have been able to reflect exactly on what I'm talking about. And this is not me pointing the finger or saying I have it all figured out. I'm actually doing exactly what I'm preaching in this podcast. I'm opening myself up to vulnerability. Gosh, I talked about my substance abuse, which is, that's pretty taboo, if you will. I think it's becoming less and less so. But that unburdens that for myself. I don't have to hold on to that any longer, or in some way put on a mask and project to the world that I don't have those wounds or that fallibility, or I haven't made those mistakes. I used to do that, and it made me sick. Spiritually sick, physically sick, mentally sick, emotionally sick. And I don't want to do that anymore. And putting this podcast out is more than just a little courageous act. This is my bold way of putting myself out there and suffering that moment of embarrassment. But the return on that investment is knowing I showed up today and in this podcast is my authentic self. Thank you for tuning in tonight. I'm Taylor Morris. This has been episode 5 of The Taylor Morris Show. And until next time, stay curious.